Hey, everybody, welcome to today's webinar. I am just getting us posted over to Facebook Live. So just a couple of notes for those of you on Zoom before we get started. For those of you who are new to this virtual plant clinic, welcome. David's been doing these every 2 weeks with topics that are relevant, up to date, and based on the weather and everything that's latest going on in the garden center. So it's been a really cool class. David today is going to be talking about the transition to fall. He's going to be covering a variety of topics. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to David so he can get us started. David, thanks for joining us again today.
All right. Thanks, Sally. Thanks, everybody, for joining me this afternoon. And of course, yesterday was the fall equinox. You know, ever since this past June, the days have been gradually getting shorter and shorter and shorter. Yesterday, we hit that mark where it was kind of like half day, you know, about 12 hours of sunlight and then 12 hours of darkness. And of course, from this point on, the days continue to get a little bit shorter. So the significance of all this, of course, is it sort of marks the first day of fall, where we are now officially transitioning from summer into fall. As the days grow shorter, of course, that's less sunlight. Gradually, temperatures cool. We typically expect to see a little more rainfall. So we're talking today about what this means in our garden and things that we can do in terms of making that transition from summer to fall. So I'll be talking about things that we can plant, a couple little chores to do in there. And then, as always, love to have you type your questions in with Sal. As you know, I look at this as a conversation, not a lecture. I just kind of talk at you for a few minutes, sort of kick things off. And then, like I said, listen to hear really anything that's on your mind, whether it's relevant to what we're doing today or not. So, as always, I'm going to kick this thing off with a few little pictures to help illustrate where we are and what we're doing. So first, I like to say, like, now is an excellent time for planting. And I make that just as a broad overall statement. Our last session, we were talking about planting grass seed for lawns, so it's great for that. And here I'm saying this is a great time to be planting trees and shrubs, annuals, perennials, bulbs, pretty much anything you can think of. It's fantastic for planting now because we can take advantage of the shorter days, the cooler temperatures. We look forward to the rainfall. So all this makes it a little bit less stressful on the plants. And of course, when the weather, like the weekend we have coming up, it makes it a whole lot less stressful on you and me to be going out there as opposed to when it's so hot and humid. So take advantage of this. But right along with that, I always emphasize, I don't care if you're planting spring, summer, fall, winter, whenever you are putting new plants in, you need to have a plan in place in regards to watering. I really make a point of this with evergreens, broadleaf evergreens, like in this picture, boxwood, but whether it's boxwood, laurels, hollies, or any of these, keep in mind, plants there, they transpire. Like you and I, when we're outside, we perspire, you know, we're sweating, we're losing moisture through our skin. Plants are doing the same process in a way, but they are through transpiration, taking water up from their roots, transpiring, losing it through their leaves. That's the lifeblood of the plant. That's how it circulates nutrients. That's how it remains turgidity. That's how it cools itself in hot weather. And evergreens, because of the nature of being evergreen, they continue to transpire all winter long, all year long. So even if you're planting in September, October, November, excelente. But keep in mind, you need to have a plan in place. If we hit a prolonged period of dryness, you may still need to go out and give a little bit of water. So again, cool temperatures, good rain, take advantage of it. But in the back of your mind, you need to have some mechanism in place to go out and water if we hit the dry spells. Spending most of my time today talking about the seasonal changes. I'm going to talk about planting both really the winter color. So this is going to be pansies. We can plant bulbs. Well, when we're talking about planting bulbs, the thing that's so cool is I always say bulbs, the whole plant is in there, the stem, the leaves, the roots, the flower, everything's packaged up in that bulb. We pop it down in the ground during this time of year with the cool weather, they're growing, they're establishing roots. You might even see a little bit of foliage pop up through the ground, but they don't actually blossom until next spring. With pansies, this to me is one of the best values in the garden for everybody, because what else can you plant in September that's going to carry you all the way over until we get to about June of next year? So pansies are a winter annual. They thrive during the cool temperatures of the fall. They're winter hardy in our region, and they'll carry over to next spring. It's the heat of summer that really stresses them out. And again, you've got so many different colors to look at. It's just the sky is the limit. And what we're really doing, of course, is we're setting ourselves up for spring. So some of the planting we're doing now is so we're ready to really get the most enjoyment out of next spring. For example, bulbs that we talked about, most of our bulbs actually require anywhere from about 8 to 16 weeks of cold temperatures to initiate their flowering next spring. Same as many of our flowering trees and shrubs. They're forming their flower buds now, but they require the cold spell of winter before they'll actually open for us next spring. So right now, just do everything that's on the list. It all happens at once, and now is the time. I also call this sort of my season of tough love. I'm trying to show I try to practice what I preach. The bright yellow flowers in there, that's Melanospodium. I took this picture, I think I did this Saturday morning, this past Saturday. So my summer annuals, what I put in this spot to really have that splash of color all summer long this year was an annual called Melanospodium. A lot of you have never heard of this. I have neighbors that stop by when they're out walking their dogs or taking the kids to school. Can't tell you how many people stop by this summer and ask, what is that? Where can I get it? Nobody's really seen this before. Because Melanospodium, when you see it in the spring, this comes in a little 6-pack, little just tiny little plants, only 3 inches tall. A lot of times they don't even have any blooms on it. But this guy just performed all summer long. You can see I have large plantings in the background here. So I did this repetition where I had Melanospodium back here, Melanospodium down the front there. These are accents, and they carry me through the entire summer months and did great. So the tough love part is when I decide to go home on Saturday and pull them out of the ground. Yep, but we got to do it. You got to do it. Pull them up and let's move on and get ready for the next season. And then these are pansies that were planted in there last Saturday, and they will carry me through until next spring. So just kind of illustrate this little part of my garden bed, which I use as a focal point. So I like to have lots of color in here. I love to see the changes of seasons go. This is Iris Cristada, an early bloomer. This was probably taking in early May would be my guess. Early blooming flower. It's a spring ephemeral. It has a short bloom season. That's where I then, for the summer months or going beyond that, I will pop annuals in here. Like I said, this image I'm showing the wax leaf begonias for the summer, but I used Melanospodium this year. Again, this is where you have fun, mix up with different plants. But these are the pansies for winter. So as they go into the cold weather, they will kind of mat down and almost look like wilted spinach. But when we get temperatures that are about 50 degrees or warmer, they'll pop up and even give you some flowers and off and on throughout the winter time. So definitely work them into these spots. And we carry that same concept through right up until the spring time period. And we complete that whole cycle. So this really is how we go about getting our 4 seasons of interest. This is where I think it's absolutely critical that we include trees, shrubs, flowers, annuals, perennials, add all our seasonal color into that. So this holds true in our garden beds, but it also holds to be very true when we talk about our containers. So I had invited Peggy, a lot of you know Peggy Beer, to give us a little show out in the annual section, how we can also add that splash of color.
One of the things that I really enjoy about living in this area is the change of seasons. and also the ability to use and to change containers in your landscape. Some of the things that can give you that incredible fall feeling, that incredible fall color, are Celosia, the ornamental peppers, chrysanthemums, pansies, and violas. While these are annuals that will be taken out by heavy frost, they will be fantastic until then. And what you can do is change out your containers, those tired summer looks, and tuck in some of these plants like the Celosia and the peppers. When it does frost, you can simply clip these things out, and then the pansies that you've placed in those containers will have more room to grow. And so you're doing two things. You're enjoying that fall color, but now you're also prepared for some color in the winter time. Particularly wonderful for the winter time is to plant some of the small evergreens in these containers and to use the violas and the pansies to complement those. Boxwood is a wonderful one that goes through the winter well in containers, and the Hinoki cypress is another one that I really enjoy using for wintertime interest. So there's a lot to choose from. You can get that fall feeling. I've already started doing that myself. I changed out about half of mine yesterday, and I think it's just so worth it to have that wonderful feeling and that wonderful look of fall.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Peggy, for sharing all that with us. Now, Peggy and I are both kind of proud of ourselves. We got a good early, or actually timely start on this. Believe me, we're as busy as anybody. And sometimes you don't get to it right away, but this is really a perfect time to make this switch over, and the weather's going to be fantastic, and our nurseries are loaded up. But you know what? It's not like it's urgent if you don't get to it this weekend or next weekend. We can keep doing planting, into October, even November. But I love to get on it now, so we get some of these plants rooted in and off to a strong start before winter comes. So with that, Sally, we got any questions regarding our sort of seasonal changeover?
Sorry, everybody, I was muted. Yeah, we've got questions. And for those of you who have questions, please feel free to start sending those in. The first question is just logistical, and I don't know the answer, so I'll ask you now. David, when are you usually in the stores on the weekend? We have some people who want to come see you.
Yeah, so my schedule is pretty varied. I mean, I work 6 days a week, but the thing is, I'm at the Fair Oaks location Monday through Friday, and I spend Saturdays down at the Gallows Road, the Falls Church location. So I'm always here, but it's retail. So
yeah,
sometimes I'm the late shift, sometimes I'm mid shift, but I'm generally here, available. Would love to see you. A lot of times it doesn't hurt just give a call first and make sure I'm there, because I do move between different stores, and sometimes I'm doing classes and presentations like you see here. But I'm always here. It's just kind of where I am.
Yeah, the question is where and at which store. Thanks, David. That's what I couldn't remember what time you were at the Gallows store, if you had timing. All right, next question is about bulbs. So this person wants to try planting bulbs in a container. They've heard about using a combination of compost with perlite and leaf mod, which I'm not sure what that is, and I've read about using potting soil. Do you have recommendations for what you use when planting bulbs in a container, soil-wise?
Yeah. So first of all, absolutely, bulbs do great in containers. The issue we have sometimes is, again, with the moisture management, because if the containers stay too wet, if they're not draining well, then that bulb can rot. And by the same token, because it's a pot, it can dry out. So I think it's best to, plant them up water them really well. And when we get into the cold of winter, maybe put them in a little bit of a sheltered location, or I've even had people put them under landscape fabric or leaves or things like that to keep them a little bit insulated. Regarding the potting mix, bulbs are so easy to grow. You could go either way. I'm going to tell you, me personally, I still like using a potting mix. Potting mix is generally some combination of peat perlite, maybe some vermiculite, aged bark put in there. Karen Merrifield potting mix is an excellent choice for this, but there are people that are moving more towards compost, and that's what you're talking about with, I think it was you talking about the compost and some leaf mold and maybe a little bit of perlite. The thinking is that, hey, that's a recycled product, so it's a little bit more sustainable as far as use of the resources. It does a relatively good job of moisture holding capacity. There's a lot of people that have been very successful with that. So either way is going to work for you. This is really pretty easy. Just make sure that it does drain, and that's a part of my concern with the compost. I want to make sure that it's not so dense or it doesn't pack down. I want to make sure that it provides adequate drainage, but probably either way would work for you.
Excellent. All right. Thanks, David. The next question is about weed control. If someone needs to control weeds in their garden beds, what is the best time to do that, and what's the best method?
Well, that's the second part of my talk. Let's just, I'm gonna, because I got pictures and I got samples, and I would definitely want to talk about it. Let's touch on that just a little bit later.
Okay, sounds good, David. All right, we have some more questions. You tell me when you're ready to move on. When your perennials finish blooming, should you cut them back or leave them so that they go to seed if they're looking dead?
Yeah. So this again, there's mostly gardening, there's not a right or wrong answer. So this, sometimes my answer is a little bit long-winded. I prefer to leave mine up above ground through the winter time. If you leave the perennials in place all the way through to the following spring, it's a number of different things. I feel like sometimes they add a little just visual interest in the winter time. It does provide seed heads out there for reseeding or possibly for birds and other wildlife to feed on. Provides a shelter also for beneficial insects that are in there. So from an ecological perspective, I would say there are definite advantages to just leaving the perennials up there through the winter time, and then don't start cutting them down till we get pretty well into spring. However, a lot of people feel like it's has an unkept look. They prefer a garden that's a little bit more tidy in its appearance. And so they do like to go in sometime, I'm saying, late November, December time period, even cut back some, or deadhead, cut back some of the old, when I say dead, the top of the plants died, but the roots are still alive, and they'll cut back and tidy up at that time. From a gardening perspective, either way, the plants come through fine. It comes down to how you want to manage and maintain your garden, but wherever you feel comfortable leaving I'm using this word debris, but the stems and seed heads and flowers, wherever you feel comfortable leaving them behind, I encourage you to leave it behind, except for the insects and the wildlife.
Okay, thanks, David. The next question is about the containers. When people are planning their containers, do you have any concerns about keeping those containers in good condition during the winter? Do you have any suggestions for making sure that they don't crack and break? Do you have any concerns about that?
Right. Now, I'm going to tell you, I do a limited amount with containers, just because I have limited time to keep things watered. It's basically it. I love them. I only have a couple of nice containers, and what I have found, and it's been reinforced by the people that know more than I, it's really kind of important that if you've got ceramic, nice ceramic glazed pots, that they are not kept directly on the ground. Because a lot of times if they're sitting on the ground in the dirt, or even directly on pavement, you get different freeze thaw cycles, and that can lead to the containers cracking and splitting. Myself, I have all my pots and containers up on what I call pot toes. They maintain a little bit of an air space under them. I do that to make sure that they stay clear in terms of any drainage that's going in there. I think it reduces the risks, a little bit of insects and critters getting into it. And it has always protected them from winter damage. I've got some nice ceramic pots that have been outside my house for 12, 15 years without a bit of damage. And I think it's really by keeping a little bit off the ground that makes a difference.
Thanks, David. All right, next question is also on pots. And I think this person is asking for suggestions to keep squirrels away from pots. I know Peg sometimes puts some gravel in hers. I don't know if you have the same recommendation or any other advice.
Yeah, that squirrels have definitely been my nemesis in a lot of gardening issues. Yeah. Now I have used Squirrel Repellent. We sell one, literally the name is just called Squirrel Repellent, nothing fancy, by a company called I Must Garden. It's all essential plant oil. So I'm talking about garlic and hot pepper and things like this. There's nothing toxic or poisonous in there, but I've had some pretty good success with that in my garden. You can do either a spray or granule, or you can sprinkle it in the pots, and it typically lasts for about 4 weeks at a time, but that may vary a little bit depending on the how much watering you're doing and stuff, the weathering that's in there. The little gravel trick, honestly, I just haven't tried it. I know Peggy said she's done that, where she's put a product called Permatil or Volblock as the trade names on. It's like a sharp, coarse gravel, and she'll put a little bit of layer on that. Thinks that helps to discourage their digging in there. But it's either like repellents or creating a barrier, and these are not perfect answers, but it does help.
Yeah, those squirrels are pretty determined. All right, David, we've got some questions on lawn care, some questions on bulbs, questions on some overwintering concepts and some other things. So do you want to keep going, or do you want to move on?
Let me move on just a couple things. One thing I did want to say, and I brought a couple of these things in for show and tell, because I get this question about chrysanthemums. Question whether they're perennial or not. So what we do, what we call pot mum. These chrysanthemums are pot mums. These were bred and hybridized and trimmed and grown to get this really dense set of flower buds on there, to get different flower forms, to get some really brilliant colors out of them. These are not necessarily reliably winter hardy. Well, if you plant them in your garden when you're done, they may or may not survive depending on where they're actually situated. We also have in our perennials department winter hardy chrysanthemums, like you see in my hand. So you can see the contrast in these plants. So if you really want chrysanthemums that are winter hardy, we have them, but they're bigger. Their flowers are more simplistic. It looks more like a daisy, and you have limited color range that's in there. So while these are technically perennials, we just don't know if they're going to be winter hardy in our climate. So we sell them as annuals. So that's a little encouragement to go out and try some mums. What I want to do is go back a little bit on this weed question, and then we'll see what else is on your agenda. So examples like crabgrass, stiltgrass, spurge, lespedeza. These are just some of the many examples that we call summer weeds. So everybody's got weeds in their garden. Mulberry weed is my nemesis. Weeds that are coming up now in late summer, I said these, because of again the changing in day length, they are now going into their flowering stage, and they want to produce seeds before the end of the year. So they are basically at their peak growth period. They're driving everybody crazy. But when we do get freezing temperatures, which usually happens for us in late October, they will be dead. They kill these summer weeds. They are gone, never to come back. However, they do produce thousands of seeds, and they will come back next year from seed. So those are summer annuals. At this point in time, really all you can do is go pull them out and try to keep up with it by hand pulling is really your best thing. While you are out working your garden right now, I am seeing these little tiny seedlings coming up. If you look closely, this is an example of a winter weed. So these little seedlings, these are the immature stage of chickweed, bittercress, henbit, dead nettle. And next spring, when you start to see them come up, they are reaching the end of their life cycle, flowering and going to seed. So the thing that's really, I wanted to emphasize about this is you can put down a weed preventer now. We talked about this in lawns last time, but this is true also in your flower bed. When you're applying a pre-emergent, prior to the seed emerging, or a weed preventers, different words, same thing, you're putting down, and they're trying to show you is what we're doing is we're creating a chemical barrier on the surface of the soil. So I shake this out in the ground, it sinks into about the top inch or so of the soil and creates this chemical barrier. If a weed seed starts to germinate, that little root hair, that little root tip contacts that chemical barrier and it kills it at that point in time. Now, because your established plants, trees, shrubs, perennials, lawns, all your roots are further down. They're deep in this soil profile, so the root tips are protected. So this is the mechanism that a weed preventer can stop seeds from germinating, but it does not harm your existing plants. So if it's appropriate for your garden, this is the time to go in and apply a weed preventer to try to get ahead of those winter weeds that come in next spring. So we always want to do the right cultural steps, which is, like I say, keeping our plants dense, keeping the soil covered through some mulching, minimizing the disturbance, hand pulling. We want to do all that. But if it comes into the time and place that you need to, then this is the time for putting down weed preventer. There's a lot of them. I'm just showing you, this is probably one of the better ones. This is called the Preen Extended Control. Most weed preventers last for about 3 months. This will give you a good solid 5 months in it. And that's certainly so. I don't know if that was the question on weed control, but I did want to emphasize, if you do your seasonal planting, again, this is all done after planting, because I don't want this to get mixed in the soil. If it gets down in the soil profile, where it does contact the roots of your existing plant, it will injure them. So this is like the last thing after you've done all your, remove the summer stuff, you plant your fall stuff, you know, you're ready to kind of like close it down for the rest of this winter, no more planting, then this can be sprinkled up, you know, on top of the soil or the mulch to prevent those weeds from coming in. So with that, now let's go back to what your questions are.
And I'm muted again. I keep forgetting to unmute myself today. Thank you, David. All right, so back to some questions. A couple of questions. Let me see. Let's talk a little bit about lawn care. We're getting some questions on that. So is it too late to seed the lawn now?
No, not at all. Perfect time. I realize I'm going to give that answer to almost every question. The best time to seed your lawn, I think, is about September 1 to October 15. That is what I call prime time. So let's try to get on it sooner than later. Again, depending on weather, I call October 15 to November 15 kind of a little iffy, depending on the weather conditions are there. So we can seed even later into the season, but if you get it down before October 15, you know, you've got like 90–95% success rate with it.
Okay, great. All right, back to preen for a second. If you're putting down preen, are you going to put that above the mulch or below the mulch?
Again, it works either way. The instructions tell you to put it on top of the mulch, but research that was done down at by Hampton Road, or is Virginia Tech down at the Hampton Roads Agriculture Research Station, they evaluated some of these products in different conditions. Because the chemical barrier, it degrades because of microbial activity, UV light, exposure to the weather. When you put it underneath the mulch, it actually lasts longer, but there's this risk if you imagine like a dandelion seed blows in and lands on that top inch of mulch, it can actually start to root in the mulch. So I think the manufacturer tells you to put it on top of the mulch. So I know I'm not giving a direct answer other than say it will work either way. I tend to like to put it down my first application. I put it under the mulch, so it actually, I think, lasts longer between applications. But when it comes time for my second application, I just sprinkle it on top of the mulch. So I sort of kind of split the difference.
Sounds good. The next question is about overwintering things in containers. So they're specifically asking about heuchera, but I know this applies to a number of types of plants. This person has heuchera planted in wooden barrels around their patio. So is there anything that they can do to help these container plants overwinter?
Yeah, most of the winter damage that I see is because things dried out. Heuchera is generally evergreen, and if we hit a dry spell in the winter, which can happen, not typically, we expect our winters to have rain, sleet, snow, and keep things moist. But if we hit a dry spell, then this is kind of weird, but even in the winter time, if your soil gets really dried and frozen out, you can lose plants to desiccation. Now, a small container has less soil to insulate and protect it and dries faster. So the larger your pots are, the bigger volume of soil that's in there, the less risk of damage to occurs. So I do prefer kind of larger pots over small pots is one of the best ways to protect them. If the plants are sensitive, or if they're in a very cold, exposed, windy environment, you need to either insulate them, like around the nursery. If we have big pots, sometimes we'll just take mulch bags and pile it up to provide extra insulation around them. If they're small enough that you can kind of snuggle them up in the corner up against your house where they're not maybe out in the full exposed area, again, to buffer them from the winds, because the winds dry and often, can lead to freezing because it's above ground. So again, just watch the watering on it. If they're large pots, you're probably going to be just fine anyway. If they're smaller ones, again, I think then you might go to the extent of trying to insulate them or move them into a protected area.
Sounds good. Thanks, David. Here's a question that's interesting. Are strawberry leaves evergreen? Will they last through the winter?
Yes, strawberries should be evergreen. Now these things might, like I showed you that picture of the pansies, and that was about as pretty as they'll look. I mean, they'll kind of flat down on the ground, not look dead. They'll still be green, but they'll just be lying flat on the ground. But yes, they should remain green.
Oh, I didn't know that. All right, some questions about fertilizer. What are your recommendations regarding fertilizer in the fall? Is there any soil nourishments that you recommend for the fall and the winter?
Yeah, it depends a little bit on the plant. Absolutely, like with lawns, we talk about this a lot. Lawns right now in late summer, they're storing and building carbohydrates in their root reserves. I would absolutely keep them fertilized. I think sometimes if you want to do a light application on perennials, you can, but they don't really necessarily need a lot of fertilizer. Some people recommend fertilizing trees and shrubs later in the season, more towards more like late October, November. The concept being that let's let them get to the end of their growing season. Let's make sure they've set their buds, shut down their growth, and then fertilize them as their roots continue developing into winter. At the end of the day, I'll tell you, I really believe more in fertilizing in late winter, early spring. So I like to do most of my fertilizer at the beginning of the growing season. So this might be like March, early April, as plants are coming out of their dormancy, kind of support that growth that's going on there. Exceptions would be lawns. Anytime if you're planting something like bulbs, putting starter fertilizer in there can helpful. But right now in late September is a little bit of a hands-off time for fertilizing most of our trees and shrubs.
Okay, and that actually leads into the next question, which is about bulbs. So we just had a class with Peg on bulbs. She uses bulb tone, or she recommends on it. I think she uses it, and she uses plant tone, I think. So she recommended that. So this person wants to know if bone meal is just as good.
Well, if you look at like bulb tone, plant tone, bone meal is one of the ingredients. So bone meal is it's an organic high in phosphorus fertilizer source. But if you look at flower tone and the others, all made by the same company, they may have composted manure, bone meal, some rock phosphate. They're taking several different organics and blending them together. So I do think bulb tone is a more complete fertilizer, and bone meal is one of the several ingredients that's in there. Again, both are good. You can't go wrong, but I would go with the bulb tone.
All right, thanks, David. For people who are planting bulbs, are there any natives that you could plant in the fall if you wanted to try and plant natives?
That's I don't know that I have an answer for that one. I was trying to think through in terms of what we have. There are, trying to think exactly. And my brain's blanking out. There's a couple things that we get that are more crowns of the plant, not a true bulb. I can't do it. I would just say the Iris Cristada, but that's really a rhizome. We probably do have some, but my mind is just drawing a blank.
Sounds good. So maybe send us an email and we can ponder over that if you want to think on that some more. Maybe get you an answer when we have.
Obviously, there's not much to choose from, but that's what I was trying to like. I think we have trout lilies would be one. I believe we have those in stock, and there might be a couple others, but there's not a huge selection.
All right, not a huge selection. Good to know. Okay, next question is for someone who has a peony. When is the best time to fertilize? Is that a same early spring, late winter kind of thing?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, excellent. What is the best time to cut back if you have a perennial chrysanthemum? Is that where you would also recommend it be left alone, or do you recommend cutting that back at some point?
So again, this is kind of the fun part of gardening, things you can play with. So the perennial chrysanthemums, I have them growing in my garden, and they spread. They've got an underground stem, so they spread. They'll get quite tall and aggressive. So what I do, again, I usually go in sometime around June, and I trim them down just to keep the plant shorter and denser, and I don't want it as tall in my garden. So even a plant like this, if I did no pruning, it would probably be twice this height and a little thinner or sparser. When we're growing mums, even for like florists like this, these mums usually get pruned 2 or 3 times through the growing season. That's intentionally to keep them short, to keep them really bushy and full. So they don't require any pruning. You could simply just plant them and let them go, but they'll be much sort of taller and leggier. So I usually do come in, even on the perennial ones, usually sometime in about mid-late June, and I'll give them a little bit of a haircut just to manage their size.
Sounds good. Here's a question about getting rid of crepe myrtle, little crepe myrtle trees popping up out of the ground. Do you use Roundup? They had one from last fall that ended up a mid-sized tree by the spring. It grew really fast.
Yeah, I think the most effective treatment is actually it's a product. It's not Roundup. It's called Stump and Vine Killer. The active ingredient is called triclopyr, and this comes with a little paintbrush. So you can, if you get a sucker coming up like that, you can literally cut that off, and while that cut is still very fresh, just paint this on the exposed cut, and the herbicide is absorbed down into the root system to kill it. Or sometimes I've taken with my pruners where I scratch that bark just to expose the inner bark and paint that directly into the wound. So you can use Roundup if you already have it, but I think if you do the Stump and Vine Killer, it's more effective on that particular plant.
Okay, that's good to know. When you are talking about winterizing containers, and I think I've heard of both of these products used, do you use Frost Guard or Burlap? Do you have a recommendation of one is being better than the other?
I prefer using the Frost Guard.
Okay.
And mostly it's a synthetic material, so it's lighter weight. It lasts longer, it doesn't rot or decompose. And I think it's a little bit higher insulating value. Nothing in the world wrong with using burlap. And some people think it looks better or more attractive because the frost blanket material, there's nothing pretty or attractive about it, but I think it's more functional.
All right, sounds good, David. I know we've got about 6 minutes left. Do you have anything else you want to cover? Just want to make sure we get to it. We still have more.
Nothing on my agenda.
All righty. Next question is about Biotone. Is that a slow release fertilizer?
It is. That's an organic fertilizer. Again, the company, Espoma, they've been in, I don't know how long they've been in business, forever, but it's a good company that's focused on organics forever. Essentially, poultry manure is the core ingredient in most of their products. So they'll take poultry manure, but then they enhance it with different minerals like rock phosphate, green sand, bone meal, etc., based on the specific plant that you're growing. Now, Biotone, what they've done is a starter fertilizer. They have what they call Biotone Plus that everybody seems to have just great results with. In addition to being an organic fertilizer, it also has beneficial bacteria and has what are called mycorrhizal fungi in there. So for the mycorrhizal fungi to actually colonize the roots of the plant, it needs to go in the soil at the time of planting. It has to physically contact the root ball that's there. So that's why it's used as a starter fertilizer. And these mycorrhizae colonize the roots and they form a symbiotic relationship where the fungi aid in extracting minerals and water out of the soil. And in return, the plant shares some carbohydrates and food reserves with the fungi. So this is the way plants grow in nature. It's just probably going about 20 years ago, actually developed the technology to culture these mycorrhizae, put them in a bag and add them to the soil. So yes, I'm a big fan of it. Use it whether you're planting trees, shrubs, flowers, vegetables, use it for any kind of planting.
All right, thanks, David. Next question is about aeration. Do you have any thoughts on that and how you would know if it needs to be done?
A real easy way is what we call a screwdriver test. Now, this isn't, there might be more scientific ways, but if you can take a screwdriver out in your yard and just, take my thumb, I put it down there and I can push that screwdriver down and it goes down 2 or 3 inches, we're in pretty good shape. If I go out there with my screwdriver and I got to beat on it with a hammer, then you are definitely in need of having it aerated. So aerating your lawn is pretty much always a plus. It's a good thing, but like I said, if you can just gently, if you can just take your thumb and push the screwdriver into the ground, it's probably not actually necessary. Otherwise, yeah, it would be a definite benefit. And again, this is a good time of year to be doing that.
All right. Next question is about a fertilizer program for evergreens. This person was recommended Hollytone for evergreens to use it in November and then again in March. Do you think that's the right fertilizing program for them?
It is. And again, like I said, that's that same line of organic fertilizers. The way I look at it, and there's a lot we don't know about fertilizers. So you're getting kind of my interpretation. Again, these aren't necessarily rights and wrongs that go on there. If I have just a plant and it's established plants in good health, but I want to continue to promote vigorous growth in there, maybe I fertilize it once in the spring. If it's a young plant and I want to get even more growth out of it, maybe I fertilize it in November and then I fertilize it again the next spring. If it's a little plant, like I've got some people that are trying to grow it, I was talking to John, he's trying to create a screen between him and the road widening, and he's trying to grow. I have him fertilizing in the fall, again in spring, and then again in late spring, kind of towards a June time period. So that would be my very high range, and it depends a lot on what your objectives are. And if it's a young plant and I'm trying to grow a lot of growth on there, then 2 or even 3 applications a year might be appropriate. Whereas if it's a mature landscape and the plants look healthy and I'm just in maintenance, maybe I only fertilize it once every couple years. So it's not an absolute rule, and just feel free to use your judgment in there. But that is a very good, appropriate recommendation you received.
Excellent. Thanks, David. All right, we just have a couple more questions, so I think we'll get through these. I have cardinal flowers in small pots. Should I put them in the ground now or try to winterize them?
I'll put them in the ground. That's the best way to winterize them is to plant them in the ground. This is going to give them several months or at least a few months to get their roots well established before winter comes. And again, native plant, the cold will not hurt that plant. And so it's just a matter of making sure it has a little time to get rooted so it doesn't dry out.
Thanks, David. All right, we have one more question. And then one person commented and said they have the pot mums and they've been coming back up for years, which is good. That's cool. Love it when that happens. So the last question is, when do you cut back peonies and iris?
Kind of let nature be your guide. It could really happen almost any time now. Like I have some people where peonies by this time of year, they're getting mildew and the foliage is getting raggedy and they got leaf spot. If the leaves don't look good, you can cut them down now. Normally, I would say we'd wait and do that kind of towards after the frost has hit them, which might be more, again, kind of a late October, November time period. Iris, actually, they kind of have, they've got evergreen foliage on there. So what I found is a lot of times after they flower in spring, you'll start to see some of the old foliage wither a little bit, or you get leaf spot in there. So you can go in there with scissors or something, kind of trim it up, cut out the bad leaves, trim out the bad stuff, really anytime you need to. But I don't actually cut it to the ground at really at any point in time.
Thanks, David. All right, we had one more question come in. So this is the last one. And this is about, I think, a shrub. Will Durvilla take the harsh afternoon sun?
What shrub was that?
Durvilla. I think it's a bush honeysuckle, right?
Yeah, that's I gotta say that's a plant that's fairly new to me. I don't have a whole lot of experience, but my understanding is it's just as tough and durable. It's native to southeastern US, and I think it will go in sun or shade from what I've seen out here. We have, I think, like one or two of them planted on the property because, again, I think a lot of us are still learning about it. But I think that does best in sun, but as long as it'll take part shade, but I think it needs at least half a day's sun to get good flowering on it.
So sun is good for that one. All right, thank you so much. That is all the questions we have, and we are at 2:46. So we will go ahead and end the call for today. So David, thank you so much. Everybody, be sure to check out our online classes if you're interested in other topics. David, do you have anything you want to conclude with before we finish up?
Just gonna say, hey, it's gorgeous right now. We got beautiful weather coming in with this cool front. So just get outside, enjoy it. This is your time to be out there and have fun in your garden.
Thank you so much, David. Everybody have a good afternoon.